we had a boom cycle in 2020, 2021, and that was spurred on by large scale funding under NEVI. That was plus the Inflation Reduction Act. That was $7.5 billion of total funding. And so the company built up a lot of raw materials inventory from our supply chain. And unfortunately, one by one, we started getting word from those site hosts that projects were not moving forward or were being delayed. Now, in the benefit of hindsight, we know what actually happened. None of that money and eventually hit the street. Well, Tritium specifically was hit very hard by that impact, right? And we ended up filing for what's called voluntary administration, which meant that we went through I'd say a lightweight bankruptcy process, but specifically production technicians, people on the floor building the product. We have about 400. Today we have about 8. I'm going to say something that I think my colleagues in this industry are not going to agree with me with, but I'm just going to say it anyways. I don't think we need any incentives. So no incentives, forget NEVI, forget IRA, it's gone. No EV tax credit, it's gone. Let free market play out. What you do have to end up doing is reduce the red tape and bureaucracy around installation, interconnection, permitting of these stations.
Hi, I'm David with EV World News. So I'm here today with our resident engineer, Mike Herzog. And also today we have a special guest, Arcady Sosinov. I hope I'm saying that right, with Tritium. Pleasure to have you here, Arcady. How's it going today?
Thanks, David. You did say it right. It's going well. I am excited to be on the podcast and tell you.
No, that's great. That's great. You're new to Tritium, right?
Yeah, relatively new. I've been in this role for almost 6 months now. And while I'm new to Tritium, I'm not new to the industry. I've spent the last 12 years in EV charging infrastructure. Before Tritium, back in late 2013, early 2014, I founded a company called FreeWire. And FreeWire was developing battery integrated ultra fast chargers. So chargers with integrated energy storage to limit the impact of electric vehicle fast charging on the grid. That company, I ran as CEO for the better part of 10 years. And we deployed close to 1,500 ultra-fast chargers across primarily North America. We did a little bit of work in Europe as well, but primarily North America. And then most recently, I joined Tritium. And now this is a global organization. We have a staff of 300 engineering in Australia. We have our production facility in Tennessee. We have our largest market is actually the UK. So we have a pretty large service and sales organization out there. But we faced the same challenges that a lot of the folks in the industry faced, which is we had a boom cycle in 2020, 2021, and that was spurred on by both investment activity and announcements by the federal government, by the Biden administration at the time, of large-scale funding under NEVI. That was plus the Inflation Reduction Act. That was $7.5 billion of total funding that was meant to flow into the sector, which never actually did.
Painfully aware.
Yeah. And I think a lot of companies, Tritium included, actually ramped up to meet the public statements that were being made by the administration. And so we built a large manufacturing facility in Tennessee, just outside of Nashville, in a town called Lebanon. And at the time that it was built, which was about 2 years ago, it was the largest manufacturing facility for DC fast charging equipment globally. So the company built up this large manufacturing facility, filled it with capital equipment, material handling equipment, all of the tools and equipment on the line that you would expect, and built up pretty significant raw materials inventory, because Tritium was one of the largest sub-awardees under the NEVI program.
Oh, no.
So all of these site owners who bid into those NEVI projects and who were given verbal indications of an award, they, in many cases, had chosen Tritium as the hardware vendor for their equipment. And so we were given very clear indication, and the federal government in our mind was a credible counterparty. We were given a indication that all of this commercial activity is going to come down the pipeline very, very, very soon. And so the company built up a lot of raw materials inventory from our supply chain. And unfortunately, one by one, we started getting word from those site hosts that projects were not moving forward or were being delayed. Now, in the benefit of hindsight, we know what actually happened. None of that money and eventually hit the street. Very, very small portion. Very, very, very small, as you know.
It seems like NEVI was poorly written. Like the rules of how to obtain the funds were made with such difficult degree, all the hoops you had to go through to get it done.
I'm okay with the money being hard to capture. If there's rules set at the federal level and they're difficult rules, that's okay because it's a lot of money at stake. I'm fine with meeting those hurdles. But it's when you go to each individual state, and each individual state, 50 states, set their own version of hard and difficult hurdles. That's what makes it very difficult on the industry as a whole. So you're going to different sites in different states and having to do different things every single time. But on top of that, the tagline, as we know, is not true. $7.5 billion was not sent out. Nowhere near that amount was sent out. In fact, most of the money is now still sitting with the federal government and is never going to get allocated, in my opinion. So a lot of companies in this space ended up scaling up their production activities or supply chain activities to try to meet that goal. And we're caught flat-footed, Tritium being one of them.
Were you able to redirect any of that at all to more international markets than stateside, or is it still kind of figuring out what that means with the additional ramp up capability you have?
Well, Tritium specifically was hit very hard by that impact, right? And we ended up filing for what's called voluntary administration, which meant that we went through I'd say a lightweight bankruptcy process. It's the best way to explain it to those that are not in this every single day. And through that, we were able to shed our liabilities, and the company's assets were sold to a larger company, actually an Indian company. David, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, Exacom.
That's right, Exacom. Technically speaking, the company that I'm running today as the CEO is not the same company that was there in the past, but it's got all the same assets, many of the same employees, although I've had to rebuild that in many ways. I've hired just over 100 people, 120 people actually since I joined here as CEO. We're up to about 300 now. But again, there's no sort of painting a great light around this. The company was caught flat-footed trying to scale up to the goals that were set, and we were forced with a pretty terrible situation. But now we're back. We have new products that we've continued to develop even through that process. Just as a fun fact, between January 1st and today, which is the end of May, as of the time of this recording, we've deployed and commissioned 500 new chargers in the field with customers.
So I understand you've got this new charging pod. It uses a fairly high amount of electricity. You want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, we announced our TriFlex product just about 3 weeks ago now. And that is looking at distributed charging in an entirely new light. And what do I mean by distributed charging? There's really two types of technologies when you look at ultra-fast charging. There's a standalone system. It looks effectively like a box, a large fridge, and it has all of the power electronics and all of the boards and components inside of it. And you feed heavy utility infrastructure to that box, and that's what charges your vehicles. That's a standalone system. That's great for small sites. When we talk about convenience stores, gas stations, you want that all-in-one system, but it really is limited when you start to scale up your site. When you're thinking about charging 8 vehicles at a time, or in some cases, 24 vehicles, 32, 64 vehicles at a time on a given site, you can think about the scenarios in which this would happen. That all-in-one technology, it becomes incredibly cost prohibitive and creates a pretty significant impact on the grid, because each one of those units would need to pull high power individually from the grid. And so when you look at large charging sites, you want to go to a distributed architecture. And distributed means you have a central power converter, potentially paired with a central battery in some cases, not in all cases, but potentially paired. sitting next to your utility infrastructure. And then each one of the dispensers that you as a user would drive up to is just that. It's a dispenser. It's a cable. It's a credit card reader. It's a screen to give you a nice UI. But it doesn't have any of the power electronics or power conversion equipment inside of it. And that's exactly how the Tesla Supercharger network works today. People always are amazed by how small that Tesla supercharging post is. It has that nice hole in the middle of it to give it a nice silhouette. There's nothing inside of it. It's just a cable management system. It doesn't even have a screen on it in most cases. It certainly doesn't have a credit card reader. It is just a cable sitting on a post. All of the actual electronics, the power conversion, that happens in a large box, sometimes 50 feet, sometimes 100 feet away from that dispenser. Distributed architecture like that is very good when you have a mix of different vehicles coming to sites at different times, so that not every one post needs to provide high power at the same time. If everybody showed up to a Tesla Supercharger site at the same time, speeds decrease. And that's okay, because you're banking on the fact that not everyone shows up at the same time and not every vehicle requests high power at the same time. And so this is where distributed architecture really plays. In the past, distributed architecture was typically limited to, let's call it 8 charging posts per power cabinet. We've developed a new architecture. It's a combination of what we call oversubscription and matrix switching. Those are technical terms. I'm happy to go into it if you think your readers are interested. But the long and the short is that we can hook up 32 dispensers and charge 64 vehicles simultaneously on one power cabinet. And that allows you to really configure the site for your needs. If you're a fleet operator, you have a choice to make. Are all my vehicles coming back to the yard at the same time? In which case I need high peak output. Or are my vehicles coming back at staggered times throughout the day? In which case I don't need that high peak, but I need that high throughput or high breadth of charging. And our architecture allows you to make that choice that's best for your site.
Nice. So how does this affect like the reliability of your network? 'Cause this is one of the big things that's ongoing with EV charging infrastructure, is what kind of uptime the chargers have. If it's just one system, because the Tesla system is famous for being 98, 99% uptime at their charging, whereas the rest of the industry seems to be at like 78%. How is this affecting uptimes?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to answer this question. So the reason that Tesla advertises a 99.5% uptime is because of how they measure uptime. One, they measure a site as up if at least half of the chargers on that site are working. So if 50% of the chargers on an individual site are down, they still consider that as 100% uptime. And when you build a big site like Tesla, that's an advantage. So that's why you can state very high uptime numbers. Their uptime, when you look at it on an individual charger basis, is not all that better than the industry, but they have very big sites. So when a charger is down, just move to the next one.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the thing. It's like 1 in 5 people, when they go to try to charge on a non-Tesla charger, tend to not actually be able to charge their car at that location. And so you're just saying that at Tesla, if that occurred, they just moved to the next power jack and they're going.
It's one of many reasons. So one, it's typically with third-party charging sites, not Tesla. You have a couple of chargers, 4 chargers, maybe. Sometimes with Electrify America, you'll see 6 chargers. Those are relatively small sites compared to Tesla. So when something goes down on that site, when a charger or 2 or 3 go down on the site, you feel the impact, right? You see a line that starts to form. Consumers get really frustrated. And so that's one problem. Build bigger sites, you have less reliability concerns. That's a bit of where our technology allows an operator to go. 2, Tesla has famously controlled the interoperability with the vehicle. And they don't have any credit card reader functionality or any screen. The 3 biggest failure modes in charging today are interoperability with vehicles, credit card readers, and screens. And Tesla decided to just eliminate all of it. It's brilliant. I'm not complaining. That's a smart move. Now they are being pushed in some of these public funding situations to actually put credit card readers. Mike,
I mean, that was going back to the NEVI plan. That was criteria on that. You have to be able to take a credit card.
But that's a huge part of the failure and why people can't get a successful charge.
So you mentioned earlier about how NEVI was kind of a problem. Do you think that was part of why Tritium became insolvent previously?
Yes, 100%. Yes.
And how'd that affect the plant in Tennessee?
So the plant in Tennessee, we downscaled in terms of headcount dramatically. At one point, that factory floor had 400 production technicians building product. Wow. On top of the indirect labor in the factory. I mean, of course, we had supply chain people, quality people, and so forth. But specifically production technicians, people on the floor building the product, we have about 400. Today, we have about 80, right? So there's the direct impact. I'm just being completely transparent and honest with you. So we ended up scaling back that production labor. We kept the factory, we kept all the tools, we kept all the equipment, but now we have to grow a little bit more reasonably, right? I'm not going to go from 80 to 400 overnight again. My plan by the end of this year is to get to about 150 people on that line as demand is starting to scale up again. But it's just not going to be the same curve, that S curve as before. But we're noticing something happen in the industry that you might be noticing as well. For the better part of 18 months, maybe 24, but I'd say 18 months for certain, this industry was at a standstill. People weren't really buying charging infrastructure. People weren't installing it at any great scale. People were nervous about what would happen with NEVI funding and IRA and public dollars. People were nervous that EV adoption would just fall off a cliff. That, oh no, here we go again. EVs 2.0, nobody wants them. Now the data has come out quarter after quarter and year after year. EV adoption continues to rise. Last year, 20% of all new vehicles sold globally were electric. This year, it's forecast to be 25. 1 in 4 vehicles sold this year.
And in terms of like government policy and regulations, is there anything you think could really help fuel reliable? Because here's an issue. We need chargers everywhere, right? And so that was kind of the idea of NEVI, was to do those hard to get somebody to invest in places to make this work. I mean, what do you think we need to see in terms of legislation to be able to help things come out?
So I'm going to say something that I think my colleagues in this industry are not going to agree with me with, but I'm just going to say it anyways. I don't think we need any incentives. The news today that the House committee passed the big, beautiful bill, as we call it, right? And I'm not going to comment on what's in the bill, except for it repeals the $7,500 EV tax credit. Fine. Don't need it. Don't want it. It's proven now that consumers prefer electric vehicles in the numbers at which they're buying those electric vehicles. And when you survey people as to what their next vehicle will likely be, more than half of people say that their next vehicle will likely be electric. So we don't need that tax credit. What I do think is a little bit of a rub is the $250 bill on EVs and hybrid electric vehicles to make up for the gas tax. That's a little bit of a rub, but listen, it's not going to change things dramatically one way or the other. So no incentives, forget NEVI, forget IRA, it's gone. No EV tax credit, it's gone. Let free market play out. What you do have to end up doing is reduce the red tape and bureaucracy around installation, interconnection, permitting of these stations. It, in California, easily will take a year to install and interconnect a new EV charging site. In other states, it's probably a little bit faster, 6 to 9 months, but it's just too long. It's just too long, and the bureaucracy and the red tape are holding up customers dramatically. And so, a legislation to fast track, at least, let it get through the permitting process within 30 days. At least the permitting process within 30 days. Fast track it, I think would be the biggest boom for this industry yet.
Yeah, we had somebody that is just doing local chargers in Colorado, and he came on and he had to start out with level 2 chargers because he couldn't get enough juice, couldn't get a transformer installed. What did he say? It took almost 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, it was equipment. I mean, they had an equipment lead time for the larger transformer for the Supercharger that they were being quoted.
And to that point, I don't think we need an investment in the EV charging infrastructure specifically. What we need investment in this country is utility equipment. Again, to your point, Mike, transformers, switch gear, distribution panels, all of meters, right? All of that equipment is very difficult to get, especially on the high power side. When you're talking about a megawatt or 2 megawatts or, God forbid, 5 megawatts plus, it's very, very difficult to get. If we can somehow fast track getting those into the country, then I think that ends up really benefiting our industry and just benefiting the country as a whole.
The clip you just saw was part of our live podcast. If you enjoyed it, don't miss out. Join us every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday right here on EV World News. We stream not just on YouTube, but also on Facebook and X, so you can catch us wherever you prefer. If you found this content valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share to help us grow. If you'd like to support our work, please consider becoming a YouTube member. It really helps us bring you the latest EV news and insights. I'll see you in the next one.